Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Roger Durling. I'm the executive director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And thank you for being here. A big thank you also to the Manitou Fund for being the presenting sponsor of the festival, as well as the support of the board of directors of the film festival. Thank you to all of them. Yesterday, I don't know if you guys were aware, yesterday was Global Movie Day. It was a day that was started by the Oscars in 2020 to take place on the second Saturday of February to celebrate the power that movies have to reach, connect, and inspire people around the world. So I find that it's appropriate that we're having the very first international feature panel at SBIFF this year. The Oscars Best International category, feature category, has always been my favorite category. I have loved discovering the creativity that is happening outside Hollywood. And yes, there is plenty or even more creativity happening outside Hollywood. This year's 5 nominated films are vibrant, electric, and very moving. All 5 films are united by a rich and expansive vision, as well by their excellence. So please welcome the directors of the 5 nominated films, Colm Barrade, from Ireland, The Quiet Girl. Did I say that all right? Okay. Edward Berger, director, producer, co-writer of All Quiet on the Western Front, Germany. Lucas Dant, writer-director of Close from Belgium. Santiago Mitre, from the director of Argentina 1985, and he's from Argentina. And please give a warm welcome to Jerzy Skolimowski, the director of EO, and the co-writer of EO, Iwa Piaskowska. Welcome, welcome. What an incredible, illustrious group. By the way, gang, I don't know if you know, but Jerzy co-wrote with Roman Polanski, Knife in the Water. So I'm in awe of the fact that the great Jerzy is here. Thank you, all of you. So we're gonna, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes with each film, and prior to each conversation, we will have a clip from the film. So we're going to start with Colm and his film, The Quiet Girl, from Ireland. The Quiet Girl is an Irish coming-of-age drama written and directed by Colm, and the film follows a withdrawn 9-year-old girl who experiences a loving home for the first time when she spends the summer on a farm with distant relatives. The film has won numerous awards, including the London's Critics' Circle Film Award for Foreign Language of the Year, Foreign Language Film of the Year. So here's a look at The Quiet Girl. Colm, this is a film that deceptively seems so small and about small things, but then you start realizing that there's a profound expansiveness to what you're doing with the film. Can you tell us about navigating that dynamic?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing to say is like this film is an adaptation of a much-loved story back in Ireland called Foster by Claire Keegan, who's one of our great authors. She was on the Booker shortlist last year for her most recent work. And I read Foster in the summer of 2018, and it was precisely what you've just described that really appealed to me. It was like the fact that it was this tiny thing in a way. It was almost like a miniature. And it's, you know, you buy it as a standalone publication in the bookstore, but it's really slim. It's like 85 pages. So it's not even, the author, Claire, doesn't even like to call it a novella. She calls it a long, short story. But there was something about, as you say, the smallness of the story that really appealed to me, because I quite enjoy when something has a kind of a modesty or a humility to it, where you almost underestimate it in some ways, but that if you give yourself to it and if you tune into the frequency of it, that there's actually a lot there for you to enjoy and to savor, I guess. And when I was preparing to make the film, when I'd be writing my kind of director's notes or any kind of documents that I was sharing with the crew or with the funders, I used to write a particular quote on the front page of every document by Mark Cousins, who's a wonderful film director who makes documentaries that are film essays about cinema, and he's a wonderful one about movies that involve children. And in that, there's this quote that always stuck with me, where he says that art shows us again and again that if we look closely and openly at a small thing, that we can see a great deal in it. So that was kind of like my mantra in the making of the film, that I would put on everything. And because, this film is it's not going to wow you with its plot. The plot is almost secondary in this film, because it's literally girl goes, stays with relatives, and comes home. So the plot isn't the thing. And it was, I understood that from the beginning, that actually the key to the film working was trying to place the audience in the shoes of this young girl. It was about mastering the question of point of view, which I'm obsessed with in cinema. I really enjoy films, particularly films that are first-person narratives, that are very honed, like Lucas's film. I really enjoy that type of cinema that's very sure of itself in terms of point of view.
You mentioned that you don't rely on plot so much in the film, but you maintain tension throughout the film. Can you explain to us how you achieve that?
Well, again, it all comes back to that question of point of view, and that the tension, the sort of narrative tension of the film is derived from the moment-to-moment experience of this young girl, which is, I hope, the experience of the audience as well, because the film works very hard in the beginning to really align the audience with this girl. So you're relying on the fact that your audience remembers what it feels like to be a child, and what it feels like to be in an unfamiliar place for the first time, or to feel fear, or to feel joy, or So yeah, it was always the question of aligning the audience with this young girl, which makes your life kind of easier in a way as a director, because there's almost like a rigor that comes with when you're very defined in what your point of view is going to be. There's a kind of a rigor that's demanded of you as a director, whereby there's a whole host of decisions that are in a strange sense made for you, and that you can't or you shouldn't let the film go in a certain direction, because that would be betraying the central commitment of the film, which is to this one character. So for instance, like the traveling sequences when she's being brought from her family home to stay with this sort of foster family, I knew even when I was writing the script that I would never need any wide shots of like the car going through the countryside, or drone shots or of the landscape or anything like that. I knew the camera would never leave the back seat of the car. And it's by doing that you're subtly placing the audience into this young consciousness. So yeah.
There is one remarkable aspect that I'm assuming a lot of you haven't seen the film, so when you see the film, I want you to pay attention to, is the silences in your film. And you colored each silence. I've never seen anything like this in a film, where the silences start having different qualities. There is the silence of fear, there's the silence of anxiety, and then there is the silence of love as well in the film. Can you tell us about working with silence?
Yeah, well, I think the question of silence is very much sort of present in the original material in Claire's story, and it sort of speaks to Irish society as well, particularly in generations past, where you know, Irish people kind of have a reputation for having the gift of the gab, as we would say at home, which is like to be able to sort of have banter and be able to talk fast and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of our ability to relate to one another emotionally, I think we haven't always been so up to speed, you know, in terms of verbalizing ourselves as our emotional selves. So silence is, as you've outlined, there are different types of silence in the movie, which I was always intrigued by, that silence can contain these multitudes, you know, in terms of what it represents. And also, like, there was something that really appealed to me on that question of silence in the original, in Foster, because it always reminded me of, there's a great Irish poet called Seamus Heaney, who's now passed, but he has a wonderful poem, it's called Clearances, and it's about his mother's death, and it's him reflecting on that moment. So his mother is lying, her body's lying in bed, and the priest is saying prayers, and the neighbors are coming around to the house. And Heaney at that point is like in his 30s, and what he's thinking about in that moment is this time that he used to spend with his mother alone. And the line goes, "When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes." And he describes the peeling of these potatoes and this silence, entirely non-verbal memory. And he describes the potato skins falling into this clear bucket of water. And he says, her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. And that's a beautiful description to me of a type of silence that's also beautifully expressed in Claire Keegan's Foster, and that we wanted to try and capture in our film, you know, to elevate the importance of that sort of mundane thing, that's sort of objectively mundane, you know, this very basic activity that a caregiver does with a child, but that which has great meaning for that child.
The film is in Irish. It is the national language of Ireland, but is only used by a minority. You know, tell us the importance of featuring the Irish language in the film.
Well, it's really important to me. I'm an Irish speaker, so I was raised bilingually. I'm from Dublin City, which is an English-speaking area, as most of Ireland is. The Irish language is only really spoken in very small rural pockets around Ireland, and I think it's less than 2% of Irish people who speak Irish on a daily basis as their working language. But I was raised, my father's never spoken English to me, he just spoke Irish to us growing up. So much like Coet's family in the film, one parent would speak English and the other would speak Irish. But historically, the Irish language, even though it is our official language, and if you go to Ireland, it's on all the road signs, and any kind of document that the government publishes has to be in the Irish language and the English language. Despite that, it's been historically underrepresented in terms of our national cinema, and it was only due to kind of increased investment in the last few years that you're seeing these Irish language films emerge. Because prior to that, you could pretty much count on one hand the amount of Irish language feature films that have been released theatrically in Ireland in the entire history of cinema. So yeah, it's very meaningful to us. And I think to most Irish people that there's an Irish language film and other films like ours that are traveling now and that are proving successful, not only at festivals but also commercially. Because, you know, I think even though most Irish people can't really speak the language that well, they have a yearning for it in a sense, you know. Because even like the form of English that we speak in Ireland has its own term. It's called Hiberno-English. Hiberno, as in Ireland was called Hibernia by the Romans, so it derives from the Latin term. But that description of Hiberno-English is a reference to a form of English that's haunted by the Irish language. So our syntax at times is very unusual in terms of how we structure our sentences, and it's entirely a reflection of how you would say that sentence in the Irish language, for instance. And
because you mentioned that not a lot of people speak Irish. Did that narrow your casting possibilities, and in particular, finding your young lead actress?
Yeah, it's certainly more of a challenge. Strangely, more so for the adult actors, because the great hope I have for the Irish language is the fact that you now have these primary schools in Ireland, which are a minority, admittedly, within the education system, but there are these schools now where everything is taught through Irish. So you do math, you do all the subjects, history, geography, everything. It's the working language of the school. So you have thousands of young Irish people who are immersed in the language now and for whom it's normalized. And so we knew when we set out that to cast this role, we were looking for, 9, 10-year-old girl, that there was a pool of young people who were essentially fluent in the language. So we kind of always believed, okay, there must be someone amongst these thousands of young people that we can find. But it took us 7 months to find Catherine. And I'll never forget the day we got a self-tape in, because it was we started pre-COVID, and then we had to go to self-tapes because COVID arrived, so we couldn't do in-person auditions anymore. And we got this tape in one day, and it was my wife, Cleona, who's the producer of the film. She saw it first, she was at home, and she just rang me, and she's like, Colin, you need to come home and look at this tape. Because it was remarkable. I always remember my experience watching it. I found myself leaning in always to the screen, because she was doing this beautiful thing, which was that she was withholding so much, which is, the camera loves that kind of performance. And to me, like, that's the essence of great screen acting, is like that sort of internalization. And she just had this innate understanding, not only that that's what the camera needs in a sense, but also that's what this character was about, that this was a girl who had learned to turn all of her emotions sort of inwards in a sense, and it was hiding herself from the world around her. So there was a beautiful, guarded kind of vulnerability to her, but then also this wonderful willingness on her part to allow the camera to witness that, and to observe her. And this is from someone who had never acted in front of a camera before, so it's remarkable.
It's an incredible performance. Well, thank you so much, Colin. So next is All Quiet on the Western Front, a German epic anti-war film based on the 1929 novel of the same name by Erich Maria Remarque, and is directed by Edward Berger. And it is set on the closing days of World War I and follows the life of an idealistic young German soldier named Paul Bummer. The film is nominated, amongst many awards that it has received, is nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Motion Picture of the Year. Let's take a look at All Quiet on the Western Front. Edward, I want to continue with the theme of language. We have seen previous adaptations of All Quiet on the Western Front, and at the beginning of your production, there was a draft that was done in English, and you made the decision that it had to be done in German. Can you tell us about the importance of it being in German?
I thought we would continue on the theme of quietness, of silence. But all right, let's continue with that, with the language. For me, that was the only reason to make the film, to make it a really German film. And I never thought I'd say this, but I wanted to make the film very German. Yeah, which is not always a quality. But in this case, I thought the only reason, yes, you're right, there has been an American film, a very notable American film, which was a huge hurdle for me to overcome, because it is a big film. Also one of my films when I grew up that I saw that really impressed me. So it took a bit of courage to overcome that. But then I thought, it's a German novel, it's German history, I was born and raised in Germany, and it's a novel that touched me very early, and I felt I sort of wanted to bring it home, and Germany is in the position that this country brought 2 world wars into the world, And I wanted to speak about that, of what that comes with, the shame and the guilt and the responsibility towards history. You know, Germany invaded Belgium, invaded Poland, two countries that are sitting right next to me, and that comes with, you know, that I inherit that, you know, and so I wanted to make this film German and speak about exactly that, you know, and so make it different from an American or a British film.
We're used to seeing war films seen from the point of view of the hero, and that is a heroic thing. We've rarely seen a film seen from the point of view of the people that lose, and also you make the film totally unheroic. You know, can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, it's not only lose, but the aggressors. You know, it's from the point of view of the aggressors, I guess. That I mean, there's this thing. This audience's history, the ancestors liberated Europe from fascism. They went into a war without wanting to, but kind of had to. We were roped into two wars. Same with Britain. And those are usually the countries that we see these type of films from, because they have the budget and the stars to finance them, and we usually don't. And so it just felt like and when I see those films, I always think that they're great, and I really love watching them. But I always feel, okay, they're heroes, and there's something to be proud of or honorable in your history. Liberating Europe from fascism comes with that feeling. And for example, 1917, a wonderful film, is dedicated to Sam Mendes' grandfather. My grandfather luckily wasn't in the war, but I could never, even if he had been, I could never dedicate a film to my grandfather, because he would have been a perpetrator, you know, an aggressor. And so it just felt like the German perspective is just one that where you can never, you know, a killing an enemy is never a good thing. A death of another soldier is always a terrible thing. And you cannot tell the hero's journey, because there are no heroes, there are only the aggressors. And so there's nothing to be proud or honorable or feel honorable about in German history as it pertains to those two wars, but just shame and guilt. And that's what, you know, that influences, as a filmmaker, your DNA that you inherit influences every decision that you make: casting, music, production design. And so if it's a German movie, it's obviously going to look very different from an American or British film.
In your adaptation, you veer from the novel by giving us the ceasefire negotiations, which adds, you know, my interpretation was that it adds this historical framework to the movie, but also it gives us contrasts, you know, from the war, and then we see the quietness of the ceasefire negotiations. Can you tell us about that, inserting that aspect?
Yeah, the movie is very much about contrast, about destruction and nature and peace and war and quietness and loudness and dark and light. And so that was part of it. But the main thing is that Remarque wrote this novel in the 20s, after the First World War. It was current affairs, pretty much the First World War still. And the Second World War hadn't happened yet. And so he couldn't include anything that pointed towards. Now we have the privilege, I would call, of the perspective on history by now. I know that the Second World War came, and I can't ignore that. And I think, and I wanted to, by including that, those armistice negotiations, I wanted to shed a light on what was yet to come, and we wanted to basically say 17 million people died here in this conflict, and still we didn't learn anything. You know, it was just the beginning of the terror, and just it continued. And so these armistice negotiations are pretty much, the story is that Daniel Brühl plays a character called Matthias Erzberger, who was sent by the military to sign the armistice with the French, because the military was afraid that they would get blamed. And they were right, because then they continued in later, subsequently, they blamed Erzberger, the politicians, that they signed the peace away. They created this myth that they would have won the war, and that Erzberger was guilty for losing it, and which was, of course, utter nonsense. But that created a sense of nationalism, a sense of need for revenge, a sense of it created and Erzberger was killed by nationalist terrorist a few years later. He was assassinated, and they gave a sense of rise to the Nazis, and then eventually led to their legitimization, in quote unquote, of the Second World War. And so that's the seedling. Those armistice negotiations are the seedling for the Second World War, and that's why we wanted to include it, to shed a light on it, and basically to say, and obviously Remarque couldn't do that because it hadn't happened yet.
I want to ask you about the score of your film is so striking. The composer is Volker Bertelmann?
Yes, perfect.
And he has this industrial sound. I guess it was a harmonium that he uses throughout the movie. Can you tell us about how you guys arrived to the score?
Well, I basically told him, I showed him the movie, I told him, I think, 4 things. One was, I want you, don't beautify anything, like I want you to destroy the images. That was one thing. And then the second thing is, I liked what you said about perspective. I very much wanted the music to have, and I think all of our films have a very strong sense of perspective here. I wanted the music to have the sound of what is inside Paul's stomach, so that it helps us to understand the rage, the fear, the urge to kill, the wish to survive, whatever he was feeling at any given moment, the hunger. And so that's the sound I wanted from him, destruction. And then I said, can you please do something I've never heard before? Which is, I guess, a very difficult thing to do. And then he went away courageously and sent me something the next day. Because he went home and he had inherited from his great-grandmother, very Protestant family, and they had used to sing Bach chorals to this harmonium. He had inherited this harmonium, which is a sort of an organ where you, with your knees and feet, you pump air into it. And so he recorded these 3 notes, it's just 3 notes basically, that he put then through a distortion, a Marshall amp, and he recorded the insides of this instrument, so you can hear it breathing, you can hear it crackling. And it was the sound for me of the war machine that eats up these children. And I called him up and said, it sounds like Led Zeppelin, I love it. Let's continue with that. And then we did. The entire score is made up of those 3 notes, pretty much.
Which it works so powerfully, especially in that opening sequence where we watch the uniform, go full circle from a dead person to your hero. Tell us about working with your DP, with James Friend, who's nominated for Best Cinematography. You guys use this wide format lenses inside the trenches. Can you tell us about that choice?
Yeah, we spoke a lot about lens choice and camera choice, and we did a lot of tests. We basically spent about 3 months locked in. I flew him to Berlin. He's from London. I flew him to Berlin and locked him in a hotel room during COVID, and I visited him every day from 8 to 8, and we sat there and did our storyboards and shot it with our iPhone. He was lying on the ground, and then I was lying on the ground. So we reenacted basically the scenes, and that way, this was before we had any trenches or any locations. We designed the trenches or our location basically to the needs of our shot list. And so we drew this and put it up on the wall and started re-editing because he said at some point in some HOD meeting, he said like, well, we've all shot battle sequences before, right? And I thought, I've never shot a battle sequence. I haven't even blown up a car before on screen, but anyway, so I pretended that I raised my hand and said, oh, well, I haven't done it. Maybe someone can help me do it. But so we eventually settled on these. I really just like, with the lens, I like wide-angle lenses because they get me close to the characters. And the camera is not distant and sort of observing from the distance, but I can be right here. I can look into Lucas's face and really look at, and it feels different than a telephoto lens. You're just with the character more. You're right here and next to, and feels for the audience. It feels you're right there with them.
Correct.
And that was the main goal also, to put us into the character's shoes and to feel like we're with him, and that's why we also filmed everything just with one camera, because we had one hero, so it felt like we either see his face or what he sees.
Yeah, all your choices from music to, as you mentioned, cinematography, has this immersive effect on us, which is pretty powerful.
That was the main directive for all of us, for me, for production design, for costume. You know, sometimes we put frost on the lapels, and this had nothing to do with continuity. It was more, or makeup, you know, the makeup, our makeup artist was wonderful. She painted a lot on this kid's face, almost like a painting. And it had to do with helping us, or helping the character express what is inside. So every choice from every department was mainly what is inside Paul Bäumer's stomach. I could have said, I said that to everyone. Like, let's see that in what we do, so that we understand what he feels like.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Edward. Next is Close, a coming-of-age drama from Belgium, written and directed by Lucas Dant. It follows 13-year-olds Leo and Remy. They spend the long summer holidays in innocent intimacy, but come the school year, their close friendship is thrown into disarray as their relationship is noticed and commented on by their contemporaries. Close won the Grand Prix at the Cannes Film Festival, the National Board of Review Best International Film, amongst other awards. Let's take a look at Close. Lucas, I'm actually so glad that we chose that clip. I was so impressed. I adore each and every one of your movies, directors that are here in the room. Lucas, but your visual imagery is so powerful. You said it in this flower farm, and then later on in the movie, we watch violently them being cut. And then at the end, we see the sort of cycle of rebirth of the flowers. You use imagery of hockey playing and the masks that the kids use when they play. You know, tell us about using that imagery to help you tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess that being a filmmaker is not my first dream. Sorry for the cinephiles out there. I actually wanted to be a dancer first. But for many reasons, I didn't continue my dream of dancing, but continued filmmaking. But when I write, I think the dancer inside of me stays very present. I try to look for ways to translate these themes that we want to talk about through the body, through images, through the course, through settings, much more than through the spoken word. And when I realized that this film would be a film about, among other things, masculinity through the prism of a young friendship, one of the very first images for me that came to mind was an image of two boys running in a flower field. I think unconsciously because I grew up on the Flemish countryside, and that is an image I had kept from that moment in my own life. But then when I started to look at that image more carefully and started to think of it, I thought it's a beautiful representation for this state of childhood. These two boys lost in that color book. And I knew that this film would be so much about the juxtaposition between the fragile and the brutal, and realized that already through the decor, already through these fields, I could transform the tonality of the film. Because when the machines arrive, because autumn arrives, and they cut these flowers from the fields, when the color changes and it becomes brown, earth, something darker, already just by the setting, the tonality transforms. And there was one image in the beginning of the script that we actually never filmed, which was an image of a flock of blackbirds flying through the air, all in the same direction. Because it represents for me this idea that when we're young, so often we want to belong to many rather than to one, and maybe even rather than to ourselves. So when I think that, you know, this boy in that black ice hockey costume who skates in the same direction as the others, in many ways he's one of those birds who so desperately wants to fit in that he betrays parts of himself. And so I always tend to look for ways, I always tend to look for visuals, for costumes, for settings, so that I can show and not tell, so that I can make it sensed and not explain it.
And the usage of the hockey, I guess it ties to what you just said, the symbolism of him playing in a circle, of falling and then having to get up, etc. Can you talk how it relates to masculinity? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I think this film is also so much about the way that for the longest time we have created this vocabulary around the masculine that is so much about independence, competitiveness, being stoic with emotion. And in this film, I think the film tries to challenge that vocabulary. It tries to show this tenderness that we so often get deprived of in that universe. The film starts in these flowers and then moves to this boy who chooses to put himself in an armor. I think the very first thing that came for me with ice hockey was the costume. You know, was this mask, this black mask in which this boy disappears for a big part of the film with this mask on, you know, this literal mask that he has on for the rest of the film. For those who haven't seen the film, there is a second part in the film that is also so much about grief and about guilt. And I think there, this armor it becomes very important because it is about when we grieve, so often we don't allow the world to see the broken parts of ourselves. The broken parts of ourselves, sorry. And so I think it's about this young boy who doesn't want the world to see how he feels anymore because he feels guilty. And I think that feeling of guilt is one we all feel for the first time when we're young. And so we try to find ways to exteriorize that also in the physicality of the hockey.
You do something remarkable in the first half of the film where you show us the intimacy between these two young boys, you know, when they're playing the clarinet, when they're sleeping next to each other, and you make us, the audience, question the nature of their friendship. You know, can you tell us about how you were able to achieve that, and the fact that you confront us, you make us confront with our own misconceived nature of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have been seeing so many men fighting and so little men holding on to one another. I think we are so conditioned to look at male intimacy immediately through the lens of sexuality, also because we have been deprived of these images for so long. Yet, when you listen to 13-year-old boys speak about each other, they will remind us of just how closely connected, how much they desire intimacy, how physical they are with their friends, and somehow we seem to forget about that. We seem to forget about that human desire for closeness, also by men. I think we have told men for the longest time that the only place that they can find intimacy is in sex. And I think that Leo and Remy are this reminder of tenderness in that male universe. I think they love each other in the broadest sense of the words. Of course, this film is also about that moment in life, childhood, when love can exist still so freely, when it doesn't have to have a name yet. And so I always told them, these boys, when we were working, I said, I don't care about your sexuality. I don't care about the sexuality of these characters because it's not what it's about. It's about how we have seen so little intimacy between men that immediately when we see it, we think it has to be something sexual.
Without us. Yes. Try not to spoil the film for those who haven't seen the film, but characters in your movie have a hard time expressing their emotions. There is one cathartic moment, totally unexpected, where is the father who actually has this cathartic moment and let's go. Can you tell us, and it's so unexpected because we don't expect a male to express the way he does. Can you tell us about that choice?
Yeah, I think we were looking for representations of men in this, and also women, in ways that we feel challenged the visuals we have been offered so many times. For example, there's a big brother in this film, which I think often in a coming of age is this character who storms down the stairs, hits his brother on the arm, and leaves. You know, that's what we have gotten from big brothers. And that's a reason why I think we have a big brother in this film who is there intimately, physically for his younger brother, who protects him, who cares for him, who's tender with him. And in the same way, I think when we talked about grief in this couple, a couple of a mother and a father, we thought it's interesting that publicly the father is able to show his emotion more vulnerably than this woman. This character of a mother who puts on an armor and doesn't want the world to see her pain, doesn't want the world to see her emotion, while her husband is able to show it. And I think in many ways, because of that, the journey of the mother and of our main character, Leo, take a sort of parallel, take a sort of same course. So I think we were just very interested in showing other representations of male characters in this piece.
How did you arrive at that scene, which is beautifully shot, where we have seen the two boys intimate, in close-ups, and then they arrive at school, and then the camera zooms out, and they seem to be swallowed by the courtyard with the other kids playing. Can you tell us the genesis of that shot?
Yeah, I think we wanted the first 15 minutes of this film to be a Garden of Eden, to be this, this childhood friendship that I think we have all experienced, that is so tender and so beautiful and so connected. The very first title of the film was based on a Walt Whitman poem called "We Two Boys Together Clinging." And it was very much how we saw the first 15 minutes of the film, these two boys together, being there for one another constantly. So I think in the beginning, you constantly see them together. They are like one and the same entity. And then we knew when these boys arrive on that playground that there's this rupture. There's this moment of consciousness because all of a sudden they're confronted with a society that divides us all into categories with expectations, with roles, with codes to behave to. And we wanted that moment to be a rupture in the film. So all of a sudden we go from their bubble, from their closeness, and the camera zooms out and makes them disappear in this jungle of people. Leaves them for the very first time to move backwards and all of a sudden see the playgrounds, see the totality.
Well, thank you so much, Lucas. Terrific film.
Thank you.
Next is Argentina, 1985. It's a historical drama co-written, produced, and directed by Santiago Mitre. It's based on real events. The story depicts the 1985 trial of the juntas, which prosecuted those responsible for the most sanguinary dictatorship in the history of Argentina. The film won the Golden Globe for Best Non-English Language Motion Picture. Here's a look at Argentina, 1985.
It's a short one. The scene is a lot more longer, and it's very good. You have to watch it in the film.
Sorry about that.
No worry.
Santiago, this film deals with the fragility of democracy, and it is such a timely subject. Everything that's happening in the world and including the United States. Did you understand when you started to make the film, the timeliness, the urgency of the subject matter?
No. No, I mean, the process of doing a film is so long and so difficult, and I have been working on this idea for, I don't even remember when, and probably my whole life. It's a subject that I really wanted to work on, about this specific trial, and about how Argentina managed the transition, the democratic transition after the horrors of the dictatorship. I mean, the trial was a unique case in the region. It was to sit those militaries on the bench and trial them only 1 year after the dictatorship ended. It was a very brave decision for the country, and it was super important for the consolidation of the democracy, and a very brave event that happened in my country, because all the militaries were, well, most of the people who ran the repressive system were still free. And Argentina came from almost 100 years of constant coup d'etat. I mean, I had a lot of admiration, and I wanted to really portray this specific trial. And I did a very long research, because I knew it was a very sensitive subject that I needed to approach carefully, and to really understand the context and the way that how the people that did this trial felt. So I did like I don't know how long, like probably 2 years of research. I spoke to as many people as I could who were involved in the trial. Of course, the prosecutors and the team they built, the judges, the many witnesses who were survivors in the concentration camps during the dictatorships, and people from the press, politicians. I did like a massive research. But then at some point, of course, I need to write a film, and when you do like this long research stuff, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I try to just write a script and do a good film, and we started writing. And when you write, and when you are thinking a film, you are focused on how to tell this story and the problems on the cinematic problems that this story carry, and how to think the characters and the structure, and then how to shoot it. I mean, and that is very difficult, and you need to be very focused. And I was living like in sort of a bubble during a long time. But then, luckily, the film was done, and we were happy with the film, and we thought that the film was good, and we started to show it to the audience, and when we started showing it in film festivals, and we started to speak to people. And we immediately understood that that talking about this trial that happened in 1985 in Argentina was not talking only about this trial, was talking about the fragility of democracy, and about the importance of justice to consolidate democracy. And the first festival where we showed the film was in Venice, where was people from all over the world, and we were talking to Spanish people who had a horrible dictatorship, and they didn't trial the dictators, and they were talking about their own history, and the Italians, they were talking about their own history, and we realized that our film was a lot more contemporary than what we thought when we were working on it, and that's not something I could expect when I started to write, but I think it's something that makes me so happy. I work in political subjects usually, and I really like to approach through cinema to the problems of society. And I think it's the biggest achievement that a film like mine could get is that people who watch it can think on the problems of society. And use the film to think about the problems of the world, where we are seeing like there's so many right-wing proto-fascist speeches growing all over the world, and I think we need to care a lot and to take care about democracy a lot.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Santiago, you made a choice. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. The fact that you spend a lot of time with the families. It is a trial, and we meet the lawyers and the deals, but we also get to know the family circle around them. Tell us about that.
Yes, it was the first time I worked in a historical event, and. Well, sadly, our main character, Julio Strasera, passed away it was 10 years ago. So when I started to research on the film, I went to his son. And I wanted to talk to his son because I wanted to understand what he remembered about the trial. And then I spoke to his wife. So I think most of the best ideas that ended up in the script, they came from the research. Talking to his son and to understand how he saw his father during this process. Well, it gave me the first scene of the film and the last scene also. His understanding his relationship, understand that this man, in a way, he had the biggest responsibility in the modern history of Argentina to accuse these militaries, but he was a normal man with his family supporting him, with a great relationship with his son and his wife, and in a way, I don't know if I will be able to explain this in English, but I will try. So, I think that this family is the representation of the society in a way, of the best part of the society that I wanted to portray in this film, a society that really wanted justice after the dictatorship, and this trial was a triumph of Argentinian society. So I felt that like I could tell a little bit of how society, or the best part of the society, felt with the trial through this family, this guy Strasera, he was a hero, but he was a man, and that he needed to do a specific job, and during the dictatorship he did not do nothing, so he was carrying with a sort of guilt. For me, it was interesting to think on what to make good things happen for the history. And in a way, he's just a regular guy that had a second opportunity, and he did his job in the best way he could. But also, there's the other character that it's Luis Moreno Campo, the deputy prosecutor. Well, the story of his family was very interesting also. So when I spoke to Luis, he immediately, one of the first things he told me was the story about his mother, that he's coming from a military family. So his uncle was part of the regime, and his mother was a Videla supporter, who was the dictator, and he decided to work in this trial against his family, or against the way part of his family thought. So I thought that was also very interesting. I think I spoke a lot, and I used most of my time, sorry.
No, you have not. I do want to ask you about, there is a tour de force moment in the film where is the testimony of the victims. And you used footage from the real events, and you mix it with your new film. In the original trials, we only saw the back of the victims. You choose to show us their faces, and they talk directly to the camera. Can you tell us about your choices and that remarkable moment?
Yes, when I started to look for images for the trial, I went to YouTube, like Google, YouTube, and I saw what the tapings of the trial, and all the tapings of the trials are only necks. The trial was completely taped, but not broadcasted, to protect the identity of the witnesses. Because, as I said, it was risky to go and sat there and give your testimony at the moment, because most of the people who kidnapped them, tortured them, were still free, and they could even be around the courtroom. And I have the painful privilege of watching all the tapes of the trial, which was a very yes, so it was impossible not to cry almost with every tape. But then I understood that that when we were recreating this trial, what we needed to see was the faces that were not seen during 40 years, or so that we could complete that memory, let's say, with this film, that it was approaching, well, through kind of non-fiction, fiction, to the recreation of this trial. So, I mean, to the pain, the anger of these witnesses who sat there heroically and tell their stories just 1 year after the dictatorship ended, for me it was very important. That's what was one of the things that define our framing. We use a frame, how would you say, frame format, which is 153, which is the framing that were used in photographs from the period, which is a great framing when you are going to have someone speaking for a long time like that, and to be close of the faces. But yeah, we are recreating this through fiction. Well, I try to use as many procedures that came from, well, not documentary, but kind of non-fiction style. And all the testimonies are completely verbatim. They're exact same words that the testimonies, the witnesses said. And they are dressed in the exact same way. We were lucky to be able to shoot in the same courtroom where the trial happened. But something was missing, and with my DOP, Javier Julia, we thought that we needed to include also the original footage of the trial. So we beside our main camera, we always had like a Umaric camera, which was the camera that was used during the trial. So then we used our fake archive, which was producing like a sort of fake archive image on what we were shooting, and then we put it in the monitor of the prop camera that was on the set, and with our camera get into that camera, and through that we could go to the original footage. So all the time we were using like that, our testimonies, and then go back to the original testimonies in the 85, but in a smooth way, so it was not destructive.
Thank you so much, Santiago. Last but not least is EO, a Polish drama directed by the great Jerzy Kolesmowski and co-written with Iwa Piaskowska. is seen through the eyes of a donkey. We meet good and bad people on Eo's path, experiencing joy and pain, enduring the wheel of fortune, randomly turn his luck into disaster and his despair into unexpected bliss. Eo won the jury prize and Best Composer at Cannes, and it won Best International Film at the New York Film Critics Circle Award, amongst many other awards. Here is Eo. Amazing. First question to Jerzy and to Iwa. This movie is all about emotion. Every moment, every scene is built, the whole film, on emotion. Can you tell us about creating a narrative that is purely emotional?
So here I am to have a final voice in the poorest English of all the panel. Actually, I try in the last few weeks to polish my English, but unfortunately, it's very Polish. So that was the only sentence I have prepared. But I would like to address the situation. The situation generally is unfair. Here we have 5 films which, in my opinion, honestly, should have equally win the best foreign film of the 2022. I have seen all of them, and I must say I honestly don't know which one is the best. They are really all great films, including mine. But we took the whole circle from our Irish colleague, who was telling about the intimate moments and quiet moments of the story, of his story, which also echoed in our Belgian colleague. And I would say that I am in the same league, talking about things which are difficult to express in words, because they are so intimate that you have to really carefully try to find your way with the actors, with the sound, with editing, and how those modest, humble films made in the rather not huge European countries, how they can compete with the big political issues, which are the main issues.
Supposed to talk about emotions here.
Emotions, okay. But those are my emotions. Here we are pretending something. Actually, I'm pretending. This is not me. This is not. Actually, those are my colors.
Who put that other handkerchief on?
My wife is telling me, take it easy. Okay, I try. But it's really, shouldn't that be a little bit like maybe in a boxing, that you have the range of the weights, you know, the lightweight, the welterweight, the cruiserweight?
We're supposed to talk about the donkey and emotions, not
Okay,
about
the donkey.
yourself.
So we try to voice of the voiceless, of the animals. We made this film out of love for animals and nature. And the animals are silent, and our voice is also kind of whisper, not a big cry. We are not the activists of the animals, but it breaks my heart, the fact that we, as a civilization of the 21st century, we accept such things like the industrial farming, which is the barbarian execution of the human power upon the world. And my film, it's a little whisper of protest about those things. But not many people, unfortunately, care about it.
No, it's not true. It's not true. Many people care about that.
Well, maybe there will be a little bit more with those who will see the EU.
Yeah. Jersey and Iwa, when did you guys understand that this animal character, Io, could move audiences and carry your film?
When we were thinking with Eva, what should be our next film after 7 years break, her idea actually was that we should be talking about something we really care about. And there were not too many subjects which we care, but one of those which were really prominent was the fate of the animals, because Eva, maybe you take
I can tell you what for me it became apparent is like on the set, you know, we had a very strange script, which is basically talking about this animal going from place to place, an animal that doesn't say a word throughout the entire story. And then I think about like a week into the filming, makeup assistant came to me after one particular scene and she said, "Oh, I know what this is. I now understand what this film is about." It was, I mean, she came to us upon seeing a donkey perform, you know, like, you know, a close-up of an eye of a donkey in a particular moment. So like when she understood, a makeup assistant who like suddenly felt moved and touched by something she saw on the screen, I thought that, you know, this is something that has a future.
And
that's exactly what I wanted to say.
And Jersey and Iwa, you guys create a sonic world through music and sound effects that create the inner voice of Io. You know, can you tell us about working on that?
Well, I really pricked my ear when our German friend was saying he wanted his composer to produce the sound of the stomach of his main character. That was exactly what I wanted to do with my donkey when I asked the composer, which is a famous Polish classical music composer, Paweł Mikietin, and I told him, "Paweł, when I show you the first cut of the film, please hunt for the moments when you can get into the donkey's head to produce his inner monologue. And Pavel did it, and it helped very much to identify with the donkey. So if the audience would feel from time to time like being a donkey, that's an achievement which we got from Pavel and myself.
It's a remarkable film. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I'm going to ask questions, and I'd love for all of you to talk about it. What was the most challenging aspect of making your film? What was the most difficult scene, or what was the most difficult part of the process?
I guess for us, the fact that we had a young girl who she'd just turned 11 when we started filming, and there's obviously labor laws in terms of working with children of how many hours you can film in a given day. So your shoot day is 10 hours, but we could only shoot for 7.5 hours each day with Catherine, and she's in 99.9% of the film. So it was a question of, well, how do you fill that 2.5 hours every day where she's gone from set? And that was a real challenge, I mean, we did have a double for certain things and so forth, but it was also a case of having to schedule larger scenes where you would need additional coverage that didn't involve her, and you would have to have that straddle her wrap time. So you would shoot her coverage first, she would finish and leave, and then we'd have to film the remaining coverage of the scene, which is still remarkable to me now when I think about the sort of adult performances in the film, that oftentimes, because even though we had a double who could stand in for them for eye lines and, but they actually chose not to use the double because they were so mesmerized by what Catherine had done earlier in the scene that the memory of that was enough for them to play off. So oftentimes they're actually acting to like a C-stand with a piece of gaffer tape for the eye line, which I forget about. I have to remind myself sometimes when I watch the film, and oh my God, it's really incredible that A, that Catherine was giving that to them, and B, that they were able to work off that as actors.
Wow. Edward?
I think the mud was the most difficult thing. I remember one evening after a rehearsal, or after a technical rehearsal, I was in the car waiting for my DOP, and he didn't show up. And I got out of the car again. This is in the battlefield, which was an old Soviet airbase. So I got out, and I hear, and it's getting dark, and it's freezing. So I hear this voice going, "Help, help, help." And I go into the mud. He had sunk up to his hip into the mud. So I had to get a crane and get him out, because he almost drowned in this mud, and I almost left him there. But no, there was one scene where Paul stabs a Frenchman in a crater.
Yeah.
And it's a very pivotal scene in the book. And I remember when I decided to make the film, I also went home to talk to my family to see if I should make this. And my kids are, of course, utterly uninterested in what I'm going to do next. So they leave the table. But the moment I mentioned this title, my daughter whips around. I hadn't known this, that she had read it in school. She said, that book, All Quiet on the Western Front, you absolutely have to do it. There's this scene where Paul stabs a Frenchman, and it made me cry so much. It was the best book I ever read, so you have to do it. So I'm standing there in this mud, and it's freezing, and we have a scene that I think it's 3 pages in the script, and 3 pages is about a minute, so we had scheduled maybe a day and a half in the movie for this scene, and suddenly Felix, our main actor, rehearses, plays it, and it's, I think, 12 minutes long. And the AD rushes up to me and goes, "Can you simplify it? Like, if you shoot it like that, we're going to need 4 days. We only have a day and a half." And I knew there was this voice from my daughter who said, it's the best scene in the book. And the AD going into this ear going, "Can you simplify?" And so I knew I had to shut one ear, and I chose to shut this ear, and then we did shoot it in 3.5 days. Yeah, it did take us 3.5 days in this mud, and there was a prop guy who had every night, he waded through in big waders, every night after wrap, he showed me how much he had run that day in his heavy gear, and it was always like more than half marathon he ran with his gear. So that was a challenging thing to do.
Wow. Lucas?
Yeah, you know, I think when we finished the script, we realized that the whole film is carried by the beautiful connection between two 13-year-old boys. So we had to find, I think, two young men who would probably have never acted before, and who would have to portray these very strong emotions in this film, because it's a film with life and death. There's all these big moments of life in the film. So I think our casting process to actually find the boys who would then portray Leo and Rémi was very challenging. But then actually turned out easier than I thought, because I met Leo, who plays the lead, on a train. I took a train at a certain moment from Antwerp to Ghent, 2 places in Belgium, for those who don't know Belgium that well. And I look next to me, and Eden Dambrin, who plays Leo, was sitting there talking to his friends, being very expressive, his eyes on fire. And I just felt immediately that there was something really, really special about him, about the way that he was talking, about his eyes. And I thought, I'm going to regret if I don't go up to him and ask him if he wants to do casting for cinema. I was also incredibly worried, of course, that would be very, very creepy of me. Luckily, I had already made one film in Belgium. So when I went up to them, to the group, because I thought I'm going to address the group, I said, "Hi, I'm Lucas." And his friends immediately started Googling me just to fact check everything going on. But he was like, his face lit up. It was like he had been waiting for that question forever. I think he already imagined himself between Brad Pitt and Johnny Depp on a carpet somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think, so I think the casting, because next to him, that one moment, we saw over 500 young boys for this part. And I think for us, the most challenging thing is that we wanted there to be this complete transparency between the audience and the characters, in their emotions, in their vulnerability, in their tenderness. So we worked with them over the course of 6 months to really arrive at that point where they would feel comfortable to show these emotions, and it would feel so authentic for an audience that you would be completely transported into their friendship.
Wow. Thank you. Santiago. I was remiss to mention to the audience that in Argentina 1985, Ricardo Darín stars in the film, and he is one of the greatest actors working in cinema today.
He is. Yeah, I love Ricardo. I think the main challenge on my film was the final accusation, the final speech of the prosecutor does. I mean, the film it's very much based in history, but we are using like a genre, well, a sort of tradition in cinema, which is trial films. So in cinema, everybody in the rest of the world, I used to see in the American films that the prosecutors, they walk and they point to the juries and they do they move a lot and they are walking everywhere. And in my film, the final accusation was just one man sitting on a desk reading a paper for 15 minutes. So I was worried on how to portray that, and I didn't know how, if that will work as the climax of the film. So I went to a courtroom for the first time, and I'm with some of my team, and we start to move the chairs in the place, and we put a chair where the prosecutor was seated, and then we put the chairs on where the accused, the militaries, were seated, and I realized they were less than a meter away. That the Strasera could almost touch these guys who ran the genocide in Argentina. And he was going to accuse them from that distance. And so I realized I could use that, that closeness or that short distance between them to build a tension, and that I could frame them so they can be both on the lens at the same time in reverse shots, and that will be like bringing the tension. And then you have like the acting magic that you mentioned, Ricardo Darín. It's a very unique actor. He can do everything with nothing, so he can bring a lot of emotion with just reading a paper. So we shot the scene many times, and finally it worked. And it's one of the things that I love the most, and I think it was one of the more important scenes in the film. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Jerzy?
Well, my biggest problem was that not only that my main actor didn't have a well-known name, but also he didn't know what the acting is, because animals don't know what the acting is, they just are. And since we all shot our films during the COVID era, we probably have the same kind of problem. And we shot it within 3 years. And we had many stops because of the COVID. I had to change the DOP 3 times. And of course, we ran out of money many times. So just to keep the crew ready for next bulk of work, we have to pay them with our private money, but that's not important. But while I was looking for some additional money, I was showing the dailies into potential private investors, and I was showing them the close-up of the donkey and saying, look, it will be full of emotions, it would be... They were rather skeptical, you know. So that wasn't easy, but fortunately, we ran into such a situation about 3 or 4 times, and we found the other 3 or 4 fools who put the money into our film.
Amazing. I do want to follow up with all of you about the fact that Jerzy brought up the idea that you all shot during COVID, and did you find that this was a test of resilience? Did you find it inspiring to have to overcome the difficulties of shooting with COVID? You know, I'd love to hear your experience making your films during this period.
We shot in September 2020, so we were one of the first productions in Ireland to gear back up after the first lockdown. So nobody quite knew how to do it, really. You know, we had prepared our protocols and everything, and we were kind of hoping this would be okay. But yeah, this is my first time making a feature film, and my wife, Cleona's first time as the producer. So in a way, we didn't know any different in some senses, but you know, the filmmaking community is a community of problem solvers. Like, that's what you do every day, you know, time after time. So If any community was going to figure a way of doing it, I think it would be ours. But strangely, I think COVID sort of suited our film in a strange sense, because the film is so restrained, or the characters are so restrained in terms of the amount of, or the lack of physical affection that exists between the characters for large stretches of the film, that it kind of felt okay, you know, that we were in that reality ourselves. But then also it made it all the more affecting. Like, the film, obviously, I'm sure most people here haven't seen it, but it does end with a rather pronounced moment of physical affection. And there was just a beautiful, to observe that moment on set and to watch that was such a special moment, you know, not only in terms of the story itself, but also for us as people who haven't been able to embrace one another as you ordinarily would do with your cast and so forth. To see that play out, you know, all of the crew were in tears watching that final scene. So yeah, it was very special, but strangely suited in a way the sort of atmosphere of the film.
We do have to wrap up, but before I let you all go, I want to ask each one of you to name a film, an international feature. It could be a film from your country that you saw this past year that we all should be on the lookout for, that we should see. Com?
You may have seen this one already, but like for me, like the best film I've seen in years is After Sun by Charlotte Wells. It's, there are some films that like become part of you, you know, they kind of become part of your inner life in a sense. And After Sun is like completely one of those films for me. Just the manner in which it presents the idea of memory. It's just so formally interesting, and I was just mesmerized by it. And it's rather aptly for a film about memory. It's a film that grows within you over time as you reflect upon it. It's a really remarkable piece of work.
After Sun. Yes, Edward.
Well, Colm stole my film. I wanted to say the same one. So I'm going to improvise. I think what Josie said, that it's hard to judge which is the best film and so forth. It'd be great, actually, I just thought of it. We have 10 Best Picture nominees. Why don't we have 10 Best International Feature films? Then we can sort of expand and make this longer, and there's so many great international feature. I think we should suggest this to the Academy. So I think one film that didn't show up here, that should be here, I think that I really enjoyed, was with you in Cannes, is Holy Spider. I would love to. I would love to have that on this panel here and talk about that film as well.
Terrific choice. Lucas?
This is really funny because you just stole my idea. I was literally gonna say Holy Spider because I remember 4 years ago when we were presenting Girl, Ali Abbasi was presenting Border, and I remembered that movie, you know, of those two trolls falling in love and being just like, who is this filmmaker? And then I think with Holy Spider, in a very different way, I think he's a shapeshifter because he again talked about monstrosity, but in such a different way as he done before. So do I now also have to say another film?
No, it's fine.
But I was going to say that, but I was also really incredibly moved by Corsage, and I think Marie Kreutzer, yes. I think she's so rock and roll, and I think what Vicky Krieps did in that film is just really, really extraordinary. So I just wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. Corsage. Yes, Santi.
I have to agree with the three films I mentioned. I love them, the three of them, and I will add the Laura Poitras film, the documentary on Nan Goldin. It's called All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. It's nominated on.
It's nominated for the best documentary.
Yes, I think it was. It's an amazing film, and also Alcarrás. It's the Spanish submission this year by Carla Simón about a small community in Catalonia, about last farm, peach farm in the area. That it's beautifully done, and it's an incredible film that I loved last year.
Jersey?
I would like to mention the only film I had tears in my eyes when I was watching the film, and when it ended, the final scene, I was just simply crying, being rather cynical from nature and nation. And obviously the film critics quite rightly pick it up as an inspiration for my film, although the donkey was playing an episodic part, but I was taught the lesson from Robert Bresson's film Au hasard Balthazar, which encouraged me to put all my emotions into the animal character, which I found out in Bresson's film that it could be moving even more than the best actor's performance, because we would take it as a natural, as not acting, and as a fact. So, chapeau bas, Robert Bresson, Au hasard Balthazar.
Excellent. Well, to the five of you, amazing, terrific films, and you're all winners, Jersey. You're all winners. Thank you, all five for being here. Thank you so much.